Life stories. Denied access at JFK? Watch how he'd turned the tables in front of everyone. Dorian Brant had done everything by the book that morning. His suit was pressed, his collar crisp, and he moved through JFK's Terminal 4 with the efficiency of someone used to early mornings and tight schedules. In his left hand, he held a dark leather garment bag, and in his right, a first-class boarding pass bound for San Francisco. He was headed to the Western Produce Sustainability Summit, where he was scheduled to deliver the keynote speech. At 58, Dorian had done this routine more times than he could count, flying first class, delivering business talks, and managing multi-million-dollar contracts with ease. He wasn't the type of man to seek attention. He preferred quiet efficiency, keeping a low profile despite his accomplishments. But on this day, something felt off. As he approached Gate 17, the line to board hadn't yet formed. A few people were hovering nearby, sipping coffee or scrolling on their phones, waiting for the flight. Dorian walked up to the desk, calmly handed over his boarding pass, and gave a polite nod to the young woman working the gate. She didn't scan it. Instead, she looked up at him, then did a double take. Her eyes lingered on him longer than usual, the kind of look someone gives when they're unsure of how to proceed. Dorian waited, no rush in his demeanor, no hint of impatience. "This lane is for premium passengers only," she said, her tone sharp, as if to justify her actions. "I know," Dorian responded evenly, his gaze steady. The agent blinked, scanning the boarding pass at last, but then hesitated. She looked back at Dorian, then over to a colleague behind her, whispering something that made the other woman peek over her shoulder. Dorian stood still, watching, waiting for them to process his boarding pass. There was no sign of hesitation in his posture, just quiet confidence. She turned back, still uneasy. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "You don't usually ask for ID when scanning a pass. Is there a problem?" She hesitated, clearly unsure. "It's just a security measure," she muttered, though Dorian knew there was no such policy. Still, he played along. He pulled his wallet from his inside pocket and handed over his driver's license. The agent took it awkwardly, placed it on the desk without scanning it, and muttered, "Wait here for a moment." Dorian glanced down at his boarding pass. His name, Dorian Brant, was clearly printed in bold letters. He didn't say a word, just stood quietly, not reacting, not pushing back. He wasn't looking to escalate things. The gate agent walked a few steps away, speaking softly into her microphone. A few seconds later, Dorian spotted a security officer walking toward them, his steps deliberate. Dorian had seen this before, the sudden shift from professionalism to suspicion, the invisible assumption that he didn't belong not because of anything he had done, but because they couldn't picture someone like him in first class. The security officer didn't ask questions. He stood next to Dorian without speaking, sizing him up. Dorian, ever calm, simply stepped back from the gate and moved aside. He wasn't going to argue, he wasn't going to make a scene, he didn't want to give them the performance they were hoping for. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call.
It rang twice before Maggie's voice came through. "Maggie, it's Dorian. I need you to pull up the catering contract we signed with Horizon Air 2 weeks ago, the one covering their western routes. Yeah, I'm at JFK, Gate 17. I'll hold." Dorian stayed on the line, his eyes never leaving the gate. There was no visible frustration in his expression, just calm. The agent glanced over, realizing he was still there. She leaned into the mic and spoke to the crowd now beginning to line up behind him. "We're just working through a minor issue," she said to the passengers, her voice louder than it needed to be. "Thanks for your patience." But no one was being patient. A businessman in a gray pullover leaned forward and whispered, "Is he causing trouble or something?" Dorian heard it, but he didn't turn around. His phone buzzed again. Maggie's voice returned, steady as always. "Got it. Do you want me to call corporate or no?" Dorian's response was calm. "Just flag it. I think they're about to recognize a problem." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. His boarding pass was still in hand, and he stood there as if waiting for an elevator to open. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the flurry of activity around him. But that call wasn't about complaining. It was a warning. Dorian Brant wasn't the type to make a scene, but he also didn't tolerate disrespect. He had spent his life building something from nothing, and he was willing to quietly remind them of that if necessary. He didn't need to raise his voice to prove his worth. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Dorian Brant didn't always wear tailored suits or fly first class. He grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, in a house with creaky floorboards and mornings that were anything but quiet. His mother, Eunice, worked in the produce section at a local grocery store, while his father, Leonard, rotated between night shifts at the mill and weekends fixing up neighbors' cars. They didn't have much, but there was always food on the table, and Dorian learned early on that how you carry yourself matters. At 15, he was up at 5 a.m. on Saturdays helping his mother sort through crates of fruits and vegetables before the store opened. It was there, among the bins of apples and melons, that he learned how to tell a ripe melon by touch, how to spot a spoiled apple from 10 feet away, and most importantly, how to talk to people. Not just talk at them, but listen, engage, and connect. It's a skill Dorian would carry with him throughout his life, one he would come to understand was far more important than any degree or fancy title. By the time he was 23, Dorian had graduated from Kent State with a degree in agricultural business and $330,000 to his name, mostly from a combination of student loans, sweat, and some smart investments. His first business was a roadside produce stand just outside of Columbus, Ohio. No employees, no big overhead, just a borrowed pickup truck, a tent, and enough determination to sell sweet corn like it was gold. He worked from sunup to sundown, learning how to deal with people, how to negotiate prices, how to read people's body language, and how to always keep his word.
But the real shift came in his early 30s when he spotted a gap no one else was paying attention to. Sustainably grown, regionally sourced produce that could scale to meet grocery chain demands without sacrificing quality. It wasn't about boutique farmers markets, it was about real food, grown clean, delivered fast, and without all the waste. Brant Global Foods was born in a rented garage, with one delivery route, a laptop that crashed twice a week, and deals made directly with farms across the Midwest. It took nearly 15 years for his company to land a seat at the table with national suppliers. Today, Brant Global Foods supplies over 30 high-end grocery chains, 5 major university systems, and, most recently, Horizon Air. The airline had come to him after a string of bad press and disappointing customer surveys about their in-flight meals. Dorian didn't pitch him his product. Instead, he listened, identified the problem, and offered them a solution. Seasonal produce rotations, direct farm-to-airline sourcing, and packaging that cut waste by half. Horizon signed a $48 million contract, but Dorian didn't lose sight of who he was along the way. His office in Dayton was a reflection of that. No awards on the walls, no shiny plaques in the lobby. If you walked into his building, you'd see framed photos of his original roadside stand and a wall covered in thank you notes from farmers he had worked with over the years. He didn't need attention, he preferred quiet, humble efficiency. The spotlight was for other people. But this morning, standing at Gate 17 at JFK, it seemed like the world was trying to put him in the spotlight, whether he liked it or not. Dorian's first reaction wasn't to get angry. It wasn't to fight back. It was a quiet, knowing frustration. He'd experienced this before. Not often, but enough. The sudden switch from professionalism to suspicion. The moment someone decided he didn't belong, not because of anything he had done, but because they couldn't imagine someone like him sitting in first class. He had dealt with these small, dismissive moments before, whether it was a shopkeeper treating him like an outsider or a car salesman assuming his father couldn't afford a new car. Dorian knew what it felt like to be overlooked because of someone's preconceptions about who belonged where. But that didn't mean he was going to shrink in the face of it. As he stood at the gate, still calm, Dorian thought back to his father's experiences. How Leonard had been turned away from a car dealership because the manager didn't think a man in work boots and worn jeans could afford a new car. He thought about his first investor meeting in Columbus, where someone had mistaken him for the valet, and how that had stung even though he hadn't shown it. It was the same story, just a different altitude. When the gate agent asked for his ID, it wasn't about security, it was about a deeper assumption. An assumption that someone like him didn't belong in a space reserved for the elite. He wasn't angry, he was just tired. tired of having to prove his worth with every step he took, no matter how many contracts he signed or how many planes he helped stock with quality food. Dorian had spent a lifetime letting his actions speak louder than his words. This moment at Gate 17 wasn't an inconvenience, it was a reminder. A reminder that it didn't matter how many zeros were in his company's contracts or how many successful business deals he had under his belt. Some people would always look at him and see someone who didn't fit the image they had in their heads.
But Dorian wasn't looking for confrontation. He wasn't looking for an apology. He just wanted the airline to fix the situation quietly. He had spent a lifetime avoiding drama and confrontation, and he wasn't about to start now. Haley, the gate agent, was feeling the pressure. She had transferred from Tulsa to JFK only a month ago, and she was still getting used to the chaos of the airport. Her supervisor had given her strict instructions: maintain order, stick to protocol, and don't let anyone push boundaries. She had only just started feeling like she was getting the hang of things when she was faced with Dorian Brant. There was no denying that something felt off. Haley knew first-class passengers by heart, the well-dressed, the polished. But Dorian didn't look like he belonged in the typical mold. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she was sure he wasn't acting the way she expected someone in his position to behave. The fact that he wasn't visibly upset, raising his voice, or demanding to be let on the plane made her feel uneasy. Still, she had a job to do. "Are you sure he's first class?" Mia, her coworker, asked, her voice low as she leaned in from the side. "He looks like a businessman, but it just doesn't feel right, you know?" Haley hesitated, glancing back at Dorian, who was still standing off to the side, calm as ever. "Yeah, his pass says he is. His boarding pass checks out," she muttered, but there was doubt in her voice. Mia raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She watched as Haley, still uncomfortable, searched for some kind of note on the system. It didn't exist. There was no real issue. Haley was just second-guessing herself. Meanwhile, the passengers in the boarding line were beginning to notice the delay, some pulling out their phones to check the status. A few murmured questions about what was going on. Haley adjusted the mic on her collar and whispered into it, trying to mask her discomfort. But the passengers were watching. The longer the delay lasted, the more agitated they became. Haley glanced at Dorian again, who hadn't moved. His calmness made her feel even more out of place. She was certain that this wasn't just a boarding issue, it was escalating and she wasn't in control of it anymore. Maggie's voice came through on Dorian's phone again, steady and calm. "I've already sent an alert to their regional VP. I also looped in Jack Rena. He's the head of food service integration on their end." "Thanks, Maggie," Dorian said quietly, sliding his phone back into his pocket. The call was over, but the weight of the situation was far from finished. The boarding pass was still in his hand. Dorian didn't look angry, frustrated, or even disappointed. He was simply waiting. Haley, however, was starting to panic. She had already escalated the situation by calling for backup. The supervisor was on the way, and now there was someone from corporate involved. In her mind, it wasn't just about whether Dorian was supposed to be there. It was about what might happen if she didn't follow the protocol. What if she let the wrong person board and lost her job over it? "Haley, you realize who that is, don't you?" Mia whispered, her tone suddenly more serious. Haley looked at Mia, confused.
"It's Dorian Brant. I saw his company on the vendor list last week. Brant Global Foods. The new produce deal with Horizon," Mia said, her voice lowered. "He's the one working with us on that new in-flight food program." Haley's stomach dropped. "Wait, what? The Dorian Brant?" Mia nodded, her posture shifting to one of understanding. "Yeah, he's the guy who's helping us fix our entire food service. Horizon's big deal. And now you're making him wait in the back like he's a problem." Haley's mouth went dry, and she glanced back at Dorian, who was still standing there, unbothered. He hadn't moved an inch, his boarding pass still in hand, calm and composed, watching the situation unfold as if time itself had slowed down just for him. Mia continued to watch the scene, but now her eyes were on Haley, who was still looking back at Dorian. Haley's nerves were escalating, and she knew something was wrong. She was realizing too late that this wasn't just about protocol, it was about assumptions. She had assumed a lot based on the way Dorian looked and the way he carried himself. She hadn't seen him for who he really was, and now her hesitation was beginning to show. Before Haley could answer, her earpiece buzzed again. It was her supervisor, the voice sharp and urgent. "Haley, I need a status on the hold at Gate 17. We're showing a delay flag on the system." Haley froze. Just handling a passenger issue, but it's under control," she said, trying to mask the rising panic in her voice. Her supervisor wasn't convinced. "Make sure it is. We've got execs from corporate flying in this morning. No surprises." Haley's hands trembled as she looked over at Dorian again. His calm presence was beginning to make her feel smaller by the second. The weight of his unspoken authority was like an invisible pressure in the air, reminding her that she had crossed a line. She wasn't dealing with a problem anymore. She was the one who had become the problem. Mia stepped forward to speak with Dorian, ready to apologize for the confusion. But just as she moved, the door to the boarding gate beeped open, and a man in a navy suit walked briskly toward them. A woman in red heels followed, her phone still pressed to her ear. Dorian didn't move. He didn't have to. He knew exactly who these people were. The moment they arrived, he had already won. Cynthia Reyes moved quickly through the terminal, her heels echoing sharply on the polished floor as she approached Gate 17. She had been midway through her breakfast croissant and reviewing a quarterly operations report when the phone call came through. It was urgent, and when she heard that Dorian Brant was involved, she knew it couldn't be good. Horizon Air had invested too much in their partnership with Brant Global Foods to let something like this escalate. Her assistant had flagged the call so she didn't waste any time asking questions. Dorian Brant wasn't just another supplier. He was the supplier, the key figure in Horizon Air's new initiative to overhaul its entire food service image. They'd signed a massive contract with him to provide sustainably grown produce for the airline's in-flight meals. The timing of this incident couldn't be worse.
As Cynthia approached the gate, she saw Dorian standing to the side, still calm, his expression unreadable. He hadn't moved, but his presence was commanding, quietly shifting the energy in the room. She knew better than to ignore someone like him, especially given his company's importance to Horizon. "Mr. Brant," Cynthia called out, her voice firm but polite. She extended her hand. "I'm Cynthia Reyes, Executive Director of Regional Operations. May I speak with you privately?" Dorian nodded once, calmly slipping his phone back into his pocket and following her a few feet away from the gate. The moment they stepped aside, Dorian didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He had already made it clear that he wasn't looking for an apology or to escalate things. He was simply waiting for someone to acknowledge the mistake. Cynthia took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "On behalf of Horizon Air," she began, "I want to apologize. I've already contacted our internal team to look into the situation. This should not have happened, and I'd like to personally escort you onto the flight." Dorian's gaze remained steady, and he smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Do you know what seat I was assigned?" he asked, his tone even. Cynthia checked her tablet quickly. "Seat 1A," she replied. Dorian's smile deepened slightly. "Interesting. I was told this lane was for premium passengers only." Cynthia didn't blink. She had expected the question, and she was ready for it. "I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Brant," she said, her voice soft but professional. "We'll make sure you're taken care of." Dorian tilted his head slightly. "The issue isn't the mistake, Miss Reyes," he said. "It's the assumption behind it." She swallowed hard, understanding exactly what he meant. He was dealing with a man who wasn't angry, just disappointed, and that disappointment was far more powerful than any amount of anger. "I understand," Cynthia replied, her voice quieter now, but still composed. Dorian didn't push further. He didn't need to. He had already said enough. Behind them, Haley stood frozen at the gate desk, her face pale. She had been watching the exchange, and now she could feel every ounce of the tension that had built up between Dorian and the staff. She had seen him as a problem, an inconvenience, a man who didn't belong in first class despite his boarding pass. But now, with Cynthia's arrival and Dorian's calm demeanor, she was realizing how wrong she had been. Mia, her colleague, stood beside her, watching the scene unfold. She leaned in and whispered to Haley, "You don't get it, do you? That man's company supplies half the food that goes into first class. His produce is in the premium meals you serve every day. If Horizon's business is going to survive this,
It's because of him, not because of us.
Haley didn't respond. She couldn't. The realization was sinking in, and it felt like everything around her was closing in. The delay wasn't just about Dorian's flight. It was about how they had mishandled a key business partner in front of everyone, and she had played a part in it. As Cynthia continued to speak with Dorian, Mia stepped away, clearly uncomfortable. The murmurs among the passengers had turned to whispers, and a few people were even recording the scene on their phones. The quiet tension was spreading, and the whole situation was starting to feel like a powder keg ready to explode. Cynthia turned to wave over another man, a tall, sandy-haired figure in a black lanyard who had been waiting behind her. "Mr. Brant, I'd like to introduce Justin Cole, Horizon's legal liaison for East Coast operations," Cynthia said as she gestured toward the man. Justin stepped forward and extended his hand to Dorian. "Mr. Brant, I'd like to personally apologize for the inconvenience. I understand that this experience has been frustrating for you." Dorian cut him off gently. "I don't need an apology, Mr. Cole," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "What I need is an explanation. After we signed a $48 million deal, how is it that I'm being treated like a security risk?" Justin cleared his throat. There was no good answer, no scripted response, no PR-approved deflection. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Cynthia stepped in quickly, knowing that this was her moment to take control of the situation. "Mr. Brant, we understand the weight of the situation. We are reviewing our staff conduct and sensitivity training procedures, and we also want to assure you that this isn't a reflection of our company's values." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "You mean it's not a reflection of the company's values, or it's not a reflection of the gate agent's judgment?" Cynthia didn't respond immediately. Dorian's words hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone around them could feel it. He gestured toward Haley, who was standing at the desk, her hands trembling as she clutched her badge. She saw a well-dressed man with a premium ticket and assumed he was in the wrong line. Not once, but repeatedly. She called for security without any documented reason. "You don't have to explain to me what that's about. I've lived it." There was a long pause. No one spoke. The passengers around them continued to murmur quietly, their attention focused on the conversation. Dorian handed Cynthia a thin manila folder, pulling it from his garment bag. "This is a signed copy of our contract. My company now supplies every fresh item on your Western and Midwest routes. That includes produce used in your premium lounge services. So when I say that the person being blocked at the gate is your brand, I mean that literally." He handed the folder to Cynthia, who took it gingerly, her expression serious now.
"I don't want a tweet. I don't want a letter," Dorian said, his voice steady. "I want better. Because the next person you treat like a security risk for doing absolutely nothing, they might not have a direct line to your VP." The silence in the terminal deepened. Everyone was listening. Everyone was watching. Cynthia Reyes took a long, steady breath as she reviewed the contract in her hands, her eyes scanning each line. The weight of Dorian's words hung heavy in the air, and she knew the situation was far from over. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew he was right. His calm demeanor, his quiet authority, it all spoke louder than any apology or excuse they could offer. As she looked at Dorian, she realized that this wasn't just about the gate issue. It wasn't even about the mistake made by one gate agent. It was about a broader, more systemic issue. The assumptions, the biases that had led to this moment weren't just happening at JFK. They were happening in boardrooms, in meetings, in offices, and in the hearts of companies everywhere. "I'll make sure this is handled," Cynthia said finally, looking up from the folder. She spoke with resolve now, the weight of the situation clear in her tone. "I'll personally oversee the review of our staff conduct and make the necessary adjustments." Dorian didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. He had done his part. His actions had already spoken louder than any words. He didn't want public apologies or grand gestures. He just wanted accountability and change. And he knew this moment was only the beginning.
The conversation at Gate 17 was coming to an end, but the ripples were only starting to spread. As Dorian turned to board the plane, the boarding gate buzzed, signaling that the issue had been resolved. He was no longer the passenger who didn't belong. He was the one being escorted onto the flight with a quiet, almost imperceptible apology from the flight crew. A flight attendant named Jordan, his expression respectful but sincere, offered to take Dorian's garment bag. "Mr. Brant, is there anything you need before takeoff?" he asked, quietly, almost under his breath. Dorian didn't respond immediately. His gaze was focused, calm, and steady as he walked down the jet bridge. He placed the water down on the tray table next to his seat in 1A, but didn't touch it. He wasn't looking for sympathy, nor was he interested in gestures. He had made his point. The moment wasn't about what had happened at the gate. It was about something much larger. The silent leadership that didn't need to raise its voice but still commanded respect. It was about showing that even in the face of unfair treatment, grace and quiet strength can make the loudest statement. As the plane taxied down the runway, Dorian stared out the window. He wasn't angry, he wasn't flustered, but his mind was racing with the same thought he had had countless times before. The fight wasn't over. It never was. The world often doesn't see you for who you are. It sees you for who it expects you to be. And if you don't fit the mold, you are too often dismissed, ignored, or treated as an outsider. But Dorian Brant knew that if you quietly demand respect and prove your worth through your actions, the world will eventually have no choice but to recognize you.
Meanwhile, in the terminal, the situation was already having a ripple effect. Cynthia, after escorting Dorian onto the plane, immediately went back to the corporate offices where she quickly convened with legal, HR, and crisis management teams to address the incident. The gate logs were reviewed, staff notes were checked, and every employee who had interacted with Dorian was called into a meeting for questioning. By the time the internal report reached Cynthia's desk, the severity of the incident had become clear. The gate agent's actions weren't just a mistake, they were a reflection of a deep-seated assumption, one that couldn't be allowed to fester. Haley, the gate agent, was quietly removed from her duties, her name no longer appearing on the schedule. There was no public firing, no announcement, but the consequences were already set in motion. As Dorian landed in San Francisco and made his way to the Western Produce Sustainability Summit, the incident was still reverberating through the airline. The legal and PR teams scrambled to contain the fallout. There were discussions about sensitivity training, corporate values, and potential damage control. But Dorian didn't need to be a part of any of that. His actions had already spoken for him. Back at Horizon's headquarters, the fallout continued to unfold. A few press outlets caught wind of the incident at JFK, though nothing too explosive emerged. It was more of a quiet ripple that moved through the right circles, the kind of story that lingered because it was so real, so quietly impactful. Dorian didn't care to comment. He didn't tweet about it. He didn't engage with the media. He simply went back to work. Weeks passed, and the story stayed with people, not because of any viral explosion, but because of the quiet power behind Dorian's actions. He had done what few people were willing to do. He had held the mirror up to the system, showing that assumptions and biases could manifest in even the smallest moments, like a gate agent questioning who should be allowed in first class. Eventually, at Horizon Air, the change began. The airline partnered with a civil rights advisory group to focus on workplace sensitivity and bias prevention. Gate agents, including those at JFK, started to think twice before making assumptions. They began to question their instincts, to ask themselves if they were letting preconceived notions cloud their judgment. And somewhere in Ohio, a retired grocery worker named Eunice Brant smiled to herself as she read the article about her son. "That's my son," she said aloud in her kitchen, a proud, quiet moment. In the end, Dorian had done more than just secure a seat on a flight. He had shown everyone around him that sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. Lessons learned. The story of Dorian Brant highlights several key life lessons, primarily about resilience, integrity, and confronting assumptions. One of the most powerful messages is that quiet confidence and grace under pressure can be more powerful than reacting with anger. Dorian didn't need to raise his voice or make a scene to prove his worth. His calm, measured response to the unfair treatment he faced spoke volumes. It teaches us that personal value and success are not determined by how others perceive us, but by how we choose to carry ourselves and handle adversity. The story also emphasizes the importance of challenging biases and assumptions even in small, seemingly inconsequential moments. Dorian's experience at Gate 17 is a reminder that everyone deserves respect, regardless of appearances or preconceived notions, and that those who quietly demand respect often inspire the most change. Finally, the narrative shows that success isn't just about reaching the top, but about maintaining integrity and treating people with dignity along the way. In life, we all encounter moments of unfairness, but how we respond to them, how we use our actions to correct the injustices, shapes not just our path, but the world around us.
If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover our content. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest updates from our channel. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next videos.